Hi, welcome to our podcast this week. And we are really excited because we've never had a guest on our podcast, but we thought, hey, who better is it to have join us than one of our most favorite accidental marketers and friends, Ginny Ertl. We met her when she was actually our client at GE. She was running Crotonville, and we were lucky enough to start working with her. And actually, she helped. She contributed to our book as well. So we've known her for a long time. And her superpowers, by the way, are that she's a guru of change, innovation, and leadership development, and team effectiveness. And she also is like the most amazing executive coach. So when we were working with her, of course, one of the things that that we all believe in is segmentation. And what Ginny did is she took that and spun it and said, let's really apply that really good idea internally to employees. So she came up with an employee segmentation concept that worked very well. So that's kind of been cooking for a while, but we're all Caltech instructors. And so Janie was doing a talk for Caltech, and she said, hey, I have a new concept that I want to share with you. And so we thought, well, this is perfect. So Ginny, I'm going to open the floor to you, and you can tell us, you can unveil your concept and start this discussion going.
Well, Mary, thank you very much for the introduction. And it's great to be with all of you. What started this thinking was actually Mary prompted me with an idea. And as Mary said, we're part of the Caltech podcast, and she said, "I think I've got something interesting as a subject for your next podcast." And it was an article that asked this question: Is Gen Z unemployable? And that got me to start thinking. And I read the article, and the more I read about Gen Z, then articles about Gen X appeared, and then articles about millennials appeared. So I had this body of information, and I thought to myself, well, is this really only about Gen Z, or should we look at the whole landscape of these generational classifications? And so then I coined this term, the generationalization. So it's a mouthful, but it's really what we're seeing as we're hearing about, and people are kind of making judgments about people based on their generational classification. So, the Gen Zs, and this is a refresher, and I had to refresh myself. Born between 1997 and 2012, millennials between 1981 and 1996, Gen X between 1965 and 1980, and then the baby boomers born between 1955 and 1964. So when I was doing the research on this, I found that there was really no agreement about each of these generations. So whereas some said Gen Z was unemployable, other research said they're talented and future focused. So there was this kind of disagreement between what was really happening in these generations. Then the interesting one was that Gen X, in some research, said they are the forgotten generation because they just can't get with it with AI. And then there was other thoughts that said, these are the very people who welcomed the dawn of the internet. So they've been there before. They've been there bringing in new technology and being very useful and successful with it. So that is what got me thinking. And I thought, I've learned a lot from the folks here on this podcast about segmentation. And this is what it really is all about, that these generational descriptions or generationalizations are really classifications. And if you kind of go down deeper, you're going to find the true segments. So whereas there's a segment of Gen X that probably does fear AI, but there's a segment of Gen Z that fears it too, because they think AI is going to take away their jobs. So you can't kind of make these blanket statements across these generational descriptors, if you will. And that's kind of dangerous because, if you don't go down to the segment, you're really not going to understand, and in this case, the employees. You're really not going to understand your leaders. You're really not going to understand who's the best fit for a certain company or a certain job. So the true success lies when you do get the insights from proper segmentation, and in this case, in your employees and in your leaders. And as I thought about it more, the job you're filling is the what. The segmentation is who are you hiring, and it's
Mhm.
important that you know the match of both.
Yeah. It fits so well with the way that we talk about classification and segmentation in marketing, right? Classification is the way that most companies segment, right?
Mhm.
They do it along the lines of some kind of firmographic information, large firms versus small firms, or if they're a consumer marketer, age groups classifications are often done, or rural hospitals versus urban hospitals, and these kinds of things. While they provide some kind of information, they're not very insightful. It ends
Mhm.
up painting with such a broad brush that there is, no inferences that can be made. Some large hospitals have the same needs and goals of rural hospitals, but if you treat them just based on the classification, you're gonna miss the mark. Just as if you limit your hiring practices to a certain age group just because the classification says, they're not all in on AI or something like that. And that's really why we got kind of excited about this, and to bring the message to our audience that segmentation is not just a concept for marketing. It's actually a concept that can be utilized in hiring and retaining
Yes.
and incentivizing
Yes.
people based on not what their age is, but how they're coming to the workforce, and what they're trying to achieve in the workforce.
Absolutely. And the work that Mary mentioned on employee value proposition was about how do you segment the employee population that you have. And as you said, how do you attract a certain segment? How do you retain a certain segment? And what segment is the best segment for your company? Back in the day, it was like, does every, at the time, millennial want to bring their dog to work? And does every company want you to bring your dog to work? Well, you know what? There's certain companies that are fine with it, certain people that are fine with it. You match them up, and you wouldn't get that insight if you weren't really doing the proper segmentation. The other one that I always found was so compelling was, on the retention side of employees. And you want to retain your top talent, no question about that. But if your top talent, again, but if the segment of your top talent is a segment that is always going to look for a job, no matter what, they get a new job and they're then looking for the next job. That's a segment. That is their behavior. That's how they act. And all the time that companies are trying to retain that segment, you have to say, give it up. You're never going to retain them. That's fine because they're always going to be looking for another job. So those insights are just so helpful, and they reveal so much.
Ginny, it's funny. I had a flashback as you were saying that because we had a room full of HR people, and when we're the
Yes.
different employee segments, one of the head HR people said, "Oh man, we've been trying to incent the wrong people with the
Yes.
wrong stuff," and and it was just like you saw so many light bulbs go in the room. And that has everything to do with, like you said, the incentives, the how you're going to spend your money. It
Yes.
was just it was classic, and so that's why I loved seeing that article. That was pretty, it was generalized, and then you took it
Yes.
to the next level because I said, Judy, there's something funky here. And, from an employee standpoint, but from an employer standpoint too, it's, it was just crazy that, you would think all employers have the same need.
That's
It was
right.
like, it was so superficial. They want people that want to work hard. Okay. Yeah. But
Yeah.
if you get underneath it, Tom and Sean always talk about cabbage or common accepted benefits. Yeah. If you get underneath that, that's where you start to unlock the things that you're talking about. And so some companies and some companies. So anyway, Sean, we haven't heard from you. What are you thinking about this?
It's a really interesting topic and one that's quite personal because I classify as a boomer. I don't identify, which you're allowed to do that these days, of course. I don't identify as a boomer. But if you think about boomers, the profile would be, well, it's an insult, first of all. If someone said, oh, I don't believe in this climate change, they say, okay, boomer. It's like, you're not relevant anymore, and that's what we expect. So it's an insult. And yet I still maintain, like many of my friends and colleagues, fairly radical views for how the world should be. So it's not as if we just sat back in our rocking chairs on the porch. They would say, boomer, AI, you look at Thomas Spitali's profile, look at his date of birth, and you say, oh, this guy's going to have trouble turning his phone on, let alone AI. Tom's an AI guru. He's taken us so far with AI. So it's personal because we see it. And I would challenge anyone listening to this to read the description, the sort of horoscope, if you will, for your generation, and see how much you align and see how much you say, no, I don't do that. And that's the reality. Now, it is useful to have a broad classification in some regards. You might want to say, are these people born in this cohort? They're all coming up for retirement. What
Yeah.
sorts of lives are they having? What experiences have shaped? There may be some stuff that's informative, but to use it as a sharp instrument to hire or to make generalizations,
Yeah.
I can't quite get my tongue around the generationalizations. There we go.
You
Um,
got
I
it.
I think that's a great word, by the way. I think it really sums up that what's wrong with this. We shouldn't throw out the idea of some broad classifications because they're heuristics, they're useful sometimes. But yeah, look in the mirror and read about yourself and see how much that it's. I would say it's akin to a horoscope. Sometimes it sums up your day perfectly. Sometimes it's way off the mark, and that's how to think of it. It's all about individuals, not about
And
classes.
what you're talking about, I think the danger is this can lead to assumptions that somebody's a boomer and they're ready for retirement. That's all
Yeah,
because of their age. And that may not be the case. Yes, there is a segment that is ready for retirement, but there's a segment that is not. These
exactly.
assumptions I think are kind of lazy. It's easy to kind of label things and think people or your workforce. It's kind of lazy and it's taking that next step to get to know, in this case of the workforce, get to know your team.
Yeah, it's the
You can't
individual.
ask those questions
It's
and
the
get to
individual.
know what they're aspiring to, what they're interested in,
Exactly. And they don't
take the
share
next step.
experiences. I mean, if you look at the example I always think is a great one is Ozzy Osbourne was born in November 1948. King Charles III was born in December 1948. So really, if we follow this logic that everyone is the same, then Ozzy Osbourne and King Charles are the same person. I would suggest to most observers there's some subtle differences between the two of them. That
That's
would be
true.
my challenge to anyone who thinks it's a good idea is say,
It's probably
explain
their
the
hair
Ozzy
product,
Charles,
you know.
That's
explain the
it.
Ozzy
Only
Charles
difference.
paradox for me.
What I think is interesting, Ginny, in the context of the workforce is you had mentioned like what segment is right for your company, but aren't most really successful companies made up of a number of different segments? People, some people that are not everybody probably can be in the overly ambitious segment, right? Because somebody's got to do, somebody's got to do the work. And aren't most really successful companies kind of made up of a number of different segments and just recognizing that you can maybe maximize?
Yeah, and I think the company I think has to know their values.
Hmm.
And one of the things that, as I work with different companies that I see, there are these value statements, there's these culture statements, there's these leadership statements. There are so many lists that companies have. because they want to cover everything, that they cover nothing.
Hmm.
So, the most successful companies will have 3 to 5 things that they really believe in, that represent their values, that represent their culture. And then the matching of that with the employees that are joining them, then, matching the segment of employee that matches to your values. So you're matching value to value. So, if it's, oh, we believe in casual atmosphere because that makes us most collaborative, and whatever that is, the culture of the company, then it attracts those people. But if a person wants a more professional environment, they're not going to go to the more, you know, the less disciplined environments that may be out there. So there's definitely a mutual matching segment to segment.
As I listened to this, the one thing that I remember one of our students had asked us, or colleagues had said, what if you as a company are trying to sell to um, your customers and you're a different segment than they are? You have to make those adjustments. And I thought that was a pretty wise question to ask, because either you find somebody else in the organization that matches that culture and those values closer, or you have to be empathetic to it and somehow be aware of it and adjust to it, even though it's not your segment. So that's that. It's kind of you can see the tiered ways of thinking about
I
that.
think that makes the even more of a case for segmentation. Because if your company segment is not who your customer is, that's okay. But you can't assume that your customer is just like you either.
Yeah.
I also think it's really opens the door to some really creative ways to design sales territories. Okay.
Yes.
Because companies, often do it on geographic
Yes.
basis, oftentimes, sometimes on like a vertical basis, and you get, expertise or locality. But I think when companies do a really good job of needs-based segments, then they can match up the personalities of the sales force or the expertise of the sales force with the needs of the customer. And one of the greatest benefits of needs-based segmentation in a sales environment is when you can say this to a potential client. Do you want to know what other customers like you have done? Because if they accept that you're really good at understanding their needs, they'd rather than hearing a sales pitch from you, they'd like to hear what have other companies in my situation done, how they utilize your services to great success. And that's a really powerful position to be in as a salesperson. You're not selling now, you're just kind of matching, circumstances together. And companies don't do that enough, I think. The allure of regionality or verticals is too strong, but I
Yes.
think segmenting that way could be very, very successful for companies.
Good. That's good. That leads me back to Ginny. When you bring in new employees and there's a mentor program, kind of like as Tom's saying, is it would be really effective for a company when they're onboarding to have somebody just like you, as your mentor to help you, regardless of age, if you're a certain segment within the organization, when they come in, if you have somebody that has been at that company for a while that has a similar style or way of thinking, it would be pretty fantastic to match those two people up. So
Yeah, I
anyway.
think I love that, this notion of reverse mentoring. You just can't say, well, this generation isn't familiar with this technology, and then just write them off. You bring
Yes.
in that generation that is proficient in that technology, and we boomers are trainable.
And with that, we're going to say thank you so much for joining us, Ginny. And we hope everyone out there that is listening, contact Ginny if you have any more questions about this cool topic. So
Thank you,
thank you.
Jenny.
Thank you.